Welcome to the ALCTS Continuing Education Committee webinar on the RDA and Serials Catalogers, Will Our Work Really Change? I'm Janet Arberg, your host and a member of the committee. Our presenter today is Steve Shadle. Steve is a Serials Access Librarian at the University of Washington Libraries, where he is responsible for local systems and services that provide access to electronic serials. Along with Les Hawkins, the concert program coordinator, he developed the Electronic Serials Cataloging Workshop for the Serials Cataloging Cooperative Training Program, and also serves as a trainer for a number of the SCCTP courses. In 2010, Steve received the Ulrich's Serials Librarianship Award in recognition of his work on e-serial cataloging continuing education. Steve is on the editorial board for Serials Review and is the current Vice President, President-elect of the North American Serials Interest Group. Welcome, Steve.
Thank you. Oh, sorry.
No, that's okay. As for announcements, if you have questions, go ahead and type them into the question box shown on your screen. Steve will answer the questions at the end of his presentation. If time runs out and all the questions are not answered, then Steve will complete answering the rest of the questions, and the attendees will receive an email with that information. Please note that the webinar is being recorded, and you will receive an email shortly after with a link to the recording. You will also receive a copy of Steve's slides. Now, let's start Steve's program, and there may be a slight delay as I turn the program over to Steve.
Okay, I think we're all here now. I'm not seeing, I'm Steve Shadle, Serials Access Librarian at the University of Washington. And I'm not seeing any big messages in capital letters from the people who are running this, so I'm assuming that all you folks can see the slides now. So what I'd like to do today is to provide an overview of how RDA is going to be implemented in for serials catalogers. First, I'd like to make several acknowledgments. I would like to acknowledge Judy Kuhagen, as always, has been absolutely outstanding, and I don't know what we would do without her. Adam, if those of you who have been to Adam's webinars, some of these slides will look familiar. He's been gracious to allow me to reuse some of his content. And I've had a recent conversation with Regina that I'll share some information about. And then I'll talk very, very, very briefly about the CRCC test, and I've also used some examples from Renette Davis's presentations. So I want to go ahead and mention one other thing at this point, which is if you have questions, go ahead and hold on to them until the end. All the slides are numbered, so that if you have a question that pertains to a specific slide, it might be useful for you to just track the slide number when we go through. Okay. So as oftentimes happens, presentation summaries lie, and this one is no different. So we're not really going to cover the results of the CRCC testing today. What I'd like to do is essentially what I'm going to be doing for most of the session is to be taking Renette's workflow that she has developed, RDA workflow that she has developed for a print serial. And we're going to go through that workflow looking at the specific RDA instructions, how they're different from AACR2, and how and what considerations that we're going to have in the future on those. So that's what we're going to spend most of the time talking about. I will touch on a few issues that are yet to be resolved, and I'll end with some useful resources. Okay. So, but let's talk about some big picture things first of all. What is really different here? As any other community of practice, the serials community mourns the passing of Chapter 12. Like any other cataloging community of practice, we've gotten so used to going to one place in AACR2 to be able to get most of our, or many of our cataloging instructions, and then to go other places from there as necessary. So Chapter 12, you will be missed. But there are many, many aspects of AACR2 which are in RDA and which actually will not change our cataloging. One of them is the basic definition of a serial. A serial, it's the same definition as in AACR2, and in fact, some of the LCRI 12.7 issues, it was in Chapter 12 issues about a serial, the definition of a serial being extended to include publications which are of limited duration or reproductions have actually been incorporated into the definition. So that's a change which has brought our practice better into sync with the cataloging rules. One of the other things that is the same is that we still follow a practice of successive entry, that we create a new description for a serial when any of these significant changes happen. Most of these are exactly the same, and in fact they've also incorporated some of the practices that we've had in the concert community, some of the LCRIs, like a major change in addition statement that represents a new scope, or a change of media type, which actually was not in AACR2, will be in RDA. We also have our sources, our preferred sources for transcription or for description are still pretty much the same as they were. For things that consist of sheets of pages, of leaves, of flat things with texts on them, or images of flat things with text on them. So images of pages. We still have the concept of using the title page as the chief source. There is an alternative which says that for microforms or for computer images, you use an eye-readable label. So for microforms, obviously that means the either the box or the frame, the initial frame in the film. And for things like direct access computer files, your CD-ROMs, your diskettes, that would be the label that's imprinted on the CD-ROM or the DVD-ROM. Okay. The LCPS for that particular, the Library of Congress, what is it, LCPS statement, policy statement, is that we do not apply that alternative for microfilm. Okay, which means that our chief source for a microfilm is still going to be the original title source for the serial. We do apply that practice for direct access computer files, which is the practice that we've been following all along, with using disk labels for our chief source rather than an internal source on a CD-ROM. Now, I do want to mention that the LCPSs, the Library of Congress policy statements, those LCPSs were used for the test. They were really intended only for the LC testers, but many other people followed them, and we'll see what happens in the future, what libraries decide to do with those LCPSs. But that's a future consideration. So, and the preferred source, if there is no title page, if the resource lacks a title page, then you're given a variety of sources to choose from. Just like with AACR2, this is an ordered list. So if there's no title page, there's a cover, no cover caption, no caption masthead, no masthead colophon. Okay. Now, if you don't have any of these sources, just the only difference between this list and AACR2 is the list that's in 12.0 does include a couple additional sources like editorial pages and other pages, but generally this list is the same and practice will be the same. And the practice is still also the same, that if the source does not, if a text on paper source does not have any of these presentations, then you would just choose another source based on where the information is formally presented. There is one little wrinkle, though, which is that instruction that we were just looking at, 2.2.2, is referring to sheets, and there's another section I didn't show that talks about moving images. But then for any other resources that are not in that format, your choice for a preferred source is either a label, just like a label on an audio CD, or, and this is one of the differences with the AACR2, embedded metadata in textual form that contains a title. Okay, so it's going to be that if you're working with something that's formatted as HTML, it's going to be that title statement that's in the HTML header. This is something that Judy Kuhagen says that she and Dave Reeser recognized at one point, and we'll be working on it in the future to confirm that this is what the real intention is and how it affects different kinds of publications. So there's one other change that has to do with sources as well, because in AACR2, each area of the record, remember those bibliographic areas, each area of the record had a specific set of sources defined. In RDA, each RDA element has a set of sources defined, and most of them are expanded beyond AACR2. So for example, under AACR2, your title and statement of responsibility area includes a how to transcribe parallel title. And so your parallel title that is transcribed as part of a title statement in your 245 must appear on the chief source. Otherwise, it's provided as a title added entry. Well, in RDA, that's not the case, because parallel title has a specific source associated with it, which is anywhere in the resource. So that if there are parallel titles appearing anywhere in the resource, then they are transcribed in the title statement. Okay. So there's one change. In this particular example, you're looking at only the Chinese title appears on the title page. The English title appears on the cover. The English title is still transcribed as a parallel title. Okay, let's take one of the other things, sort of a big picture thing that's different, is the square brackets that are used and how they're used. And this is not an RDA change specifically. This is a change in ISBD practices, that individual elements, any individual element in description gets its own set of square brackets around it. So you can see one example, the example of a 260 where there's one set of square brackets around the whole thing because both elements are supplied by the cataloger, versus an RDA where the individual elements each get their own set of square brackets, because we're thinking of things in terms of elements now. Abbreviations. In Appendix B of RDA, it does state that any transcribed elements you do not abbreviate. You do not supply abbreviations. For transcribed elements, use only those abbreviations found in the sources of information for the element. So in a catalog record in general, we will be seeing more, less use of abbreviations, more fuller forms as they appear on the piece. And here's an example of that, where the source of information reads with no abbreviations. In AACR2, you would abbreviate the province of the publication, the province, the word department, and the captions of the numbering and the month of the publication. In this case, with RDA, you do not abbreviate these elements. Okay, this is a minor point, but there also is a change in ISBD practice, again, that's going to be reflected in RDA records, that if the element ends in an abbreviation with a period and ISBD requires another period to as an introductory element for the next bibliographic element, then you would actually have two periods. And so here's a case where you have an addition statement that's not uncommon to see in a serial record, something like a regional edition, Northwest Ed. The 250, the addition statement, will actually have a period after, two periods after the addition, one for the abbreviation of addition and the other one that's ISBD punctuation that introduces the next element. Now let's start going through and creating a serial record as if we were following Renette's Davis's workflow. So one of the first considerations is the title proper. The transcription of title proper is pretty much the same under RDA and under AACR2 for a serial. One of the differences that you might see is in the use of the mark of omission. For AACR2, if there is a reason to use a mark of omission in a statement, if there's an element of the title proper which varies from issue to issue, it has been AACR2 practice to not put a mark of omission at the beginning of the title statement, but to have it if it is anywhere else in the title statement. So in the case of an annual report where the presentation is on the piece is something like 2010 annual report, RDA will specify that you will have a mark of omission at the beginning of that title statement, beginning of that title proper. Also, I had a conversation with Adam Schiff a couple days ago, and he pointed out that this would also, the mark of omission would also happen at the end of the title, even if the element which varies from issue to issue, the date, the number, the name, is not grammatically connected. So if you had a presentation, but it was perceived as part of the title. So if you had a presentation that on the title page it said all very clearly one statement, annual report 2010, where a monograph cataloger would typically look at that and transcribe all of that as a title proper. That date is considered part of the title statement and would use a mark of omission to represent that as well, even though it appears at the end, even though it is not grammatically connected and appears at the end of the title. Okay, so the next element in your title statement would typically be a GMD if it is a non-print. We have, as you well know, if you've been following this at all, the GMD will not be a part of RDA. It'll not be an RDA element, and instead it is replaced with three separate elements. The content type, which is the form of communication, how a work is expressed, the media type, which is generally the type of device that's necessary to use the resource, and the carrier type, which is the physical medium, the storage medium that's used. I provided examples here. If you want more examples, you can reference Adam Schiff's presentation. He goes into great detail on some of these. Judy Kuhagen wanted me to point out that media type is actually not an RDA core element, as the core elements are currently identified, but the other two elements are. So here's two examples of the fields that replace a GMD. The first example is just of a standard print serial. The second one is a case of an e-serial. I think that how, even though there's a lot of text here, I think most catalogers will probably be setting up macros, that kind of thing, to supply these elements so that they don't have to do a lot of typing. Okay, the next element in a title statement we already talked about was the parallel title, if one exists. First of all, there's no concept in RDA of that second level description. So the cataloger does not have to make a choice if being presented with more than two different languages and presentation of the title proper. Okay, so that's one change. Just everything will be transcribed, and the other change is that is again that concept that the entire resource is a source for parallel titles. Other title information, subtitles. In Chapter 12 in AACR2, you were only required to transcribe other title information in 3 situations, or if for some reason it was considered important for identification. The first 2 situations are presented on this slide. If the other title information was an acronym or initialism of the title, or if it included a statement of responsibility. With RDA, we basically say record other title information appearing on the same source as the title proper. And so we always transcribe another title information. The LCPS for this RDA element has specified this element as a core element for the Library of Congress. So, but it's not a core element in RDA. So depending on which standard you're following, you may or may not be including it in your title statement in your 245. The third case of where a serials cataloger supplied or provided other title information was in the case where a title proper consisted of nothing more than a corporate body or conference statement or personal name. Okay. So in that case, just to make sure there was no confusion between the corporate body being responsible and the fact that this is actually the title of a publication, the cataloger provided a subtitle, other title information. So here's an example where we have the first one is a proceedings of a conference where the word proceedings does not actually appear on the title page, so the cataloger has supplied it, or a program associated with a festival, or a newsletter about an individual. So in RDA we would not supply those that other title information. So you can see what the RDA 245, the 245 statements associated that would be transcribed according to following RDA would look like. Now, just so that you're aware, there are some situations for cartographic resources and for moving image resources where you would supply other title information. I think Adam has provided examples of these in his workshop. So, but for serials, there aren't that many serials which are moving image resources, and relatively speaking, not a lot that are cartographic resources. Okay, the statement of responsibility. There was in the concert cataloging manual an instruction that said that you would give a personal name in a statement of responsibility only when it is clear that that person is the author of the text and there's no corporate body responsible for issuing the serial, and that the author is recorded as the main entry. And we'll talk about the authorized entry element, the authorized access point, a little later. But there was a general concert practice which discouraged catalogers from transcribing statements of responsibility that included personal names. In RDA and in the LCPSs, that guidance is not there. So you would transcribe a statement of responsibility for a serial in the same manner or in a similar manner that you would for a monograph. So under RDA, under the current implementation of RDA, you would have many more cases where you have people's names in statements of responsibility, which are transcribed from a single issue. Now there is a specific RDA instruction that has to do with statements, editorial statements. In AACR2, there was a statement that said do not record statements of responsibilities for serials, we're in Chapter 12, who are editors. If a statement relating to an editor is considered necessary by the cataloging agency, give it in a note. So, so basically we would have editor notes, 500 fields that would have notes about editorial information. Also, I wanted to point out that the source of information for statement of responsibility in AACR2 was the chief source and the chief source substitute. Now under RDA, for a serial, and this rule is specific to a serial, it says to record a statement of responsibility identifying an editorial of a serial only if the name of the editor is considered to be an important means of identifying the serial. So if a particular person is known to be associated with a serial for most of its existence, or if the person's name is very well known. So for editors, you can make that judgment call, but in the case that we saw earlier where we actually had authors, or we had two authors who were responsible for the intellectual content of that issue of the serial, that would still be transcribed. The other thing I wanted to point out here was for statements of responsibility that the sources for statement of responsibility will vary by the type of statement of responsibility, but it's typically broader sources, more sources than in AACR2. And you can look at RDA 2.4.2 and 2.2.4 if you want to see what those sources are. And those are in the notes on the slide, so you don't need to worry about copying that down right now. So after we've transcribed our statement of responsibility in the serial record, typically the 245, and all of the title statement, one of the next considerations that a cataloger makes is that of main entry. Okay. So RDA talks about that as being a creator. So you do have to make a decision whether you have a corporate body as a creator. The rules for corporate body creator are very similar to the AACR2 rules. In fact, that LCRI was pretty much taken whole cloth, and AACR2 was pretty much taken whole cloth and transferred into RDA 19.2.1.1.1 that you see cited up there. So when you have a corporate body creator or a family that is a creator, the rules are pretty much the same as they already as they were under AACR2 and practice, cataloging practice. Okay. I'm sorry, I meant corporate body and conference. For a person or for a family as a creator, I've cited the rules there, the RDA rules 18.4 and 19.2. And those are people that are responsible for the creation of the work. There is a certain amount of case law in RDA, just as there was in AACR2, in terms of providing different, translator, an original work in a translator, and all those sort of case law examples. But the general principle was that the creator is who is responsible for the creation of a work. And then this statement from RDA is pretty clear that if there's more than one creator responsible for the work, either identify the creator with principal responsibility, or if principal responsibility is not indicated, then identify the first named creator, the first named person as the creator. So, and unfortunately I forgot to format the slide, so I went ahead and I always spoil my surprises. I can't help myself. So this whole time you've been seeing the example that we looked at of statement of responsibility. This is actually how the 1XX and the 245 fields would appear in that record following RDA, which is you would actually have a personal name main entry because the author of the work is the first named author, and in examining the work you can see that they are actually the authors of the work and not editors, compilers, etc. Now, note that, again, I'm going to say the LC policy statements were created by the Library of Congress for the LC testers. So LC will be working with PCC for any specific policy decisions that come forward. So what happened was there was actually an LCRI, because serials catalogers very rarely use personal names, and as a serials cataloger who's been working for probably 18 years now doing serials cataloging, I have considered myself blessed by the fact that I need to know very little about personal names. Unfortunately, I think that will change a little bit with RDA, because we used to have a rule interpretation under Rule 21-1A2, which very much limited the application of personal name main entry to serial records. It guided the cataloger by saying, consider the entire run of the serial to know whether a person's going to be involved with it, whether it's going to be a personal name main entry, including the fact that if it seems that the publication is unlikely to continue without that person. So there was some judgment that was involved. We always called this the rather macabre, in a rather macabre fashion, the death rule. If the person died, would the publication still continue? And the LCRI also gave some fairly specific guidance in terms of these three conditions that are laid out here, with a general admonition at the end, always lean toward not entering a serial under the heading for a person. Okay. This LCRI was not transferred to the LC policy statements. So if you're creating serial records following RDA and following the LC policy statements, you would have a presentation of a catalog record of 100, 245 like we saw on the previous screen. Now, of course, that's going to cause some changes in practice, because a change in, as we saw looking at the 5 types of changes for which you would create a new description, a change in the authorized access point is one of those, or not the authorized access point, but the authorized creator. So we probably will have more cases of creation of new records if we were just following RDA as it currently exists. But there are some options here. One of them is that the CONSER program can work with PSD to reinstate some form of this RI as an LC policy statement, and I can certainly see that happening in the future. Another possibility that I had a conversation with Adam yesterday, and another possibility could be that that particular rule for creating a new description, if the creator changes, could follow the same practice as it does for multiparts, which is a multipart will only change, a new description will only be created for a multipart, essentially if the mode of issuance or the media type changes. Okay, so if it changes from multipart to a serial or to something else, or if the format changes, the media type changes, or if the change in creator, if the creator is not, the name is not used as an addition to an authorized access point, so as a qualifier for an authorized access point. Okay, so essentially the uniform title. So otherwise, the multipart, a new description is not created, even if the authorship changes. So that would be another possibility. That practice could be instituted for serials, but I think it's something that's going to require discussion among the CONSER community and the serials community. Okay, so after we have identified our creator, which in AACR2 speak would be our main entry. We would record additional relationships to person families or corporate bodies. We would record these relationships in mark added entry fields, 7xx fields. Specifically for creators, you may also record additional creators in mark XX fields, and any other persons, families, or corporate bodies that are important for access. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about relationship designators, because that's a new feature. A new feature with RDA. We actually had long ago used relationship designators in cataloging to some degree and stopped doing it. So by definition, a relationship designator is a designator that indicates the nature of the relationship between entities represented by authorized access points, descriptions, and/or identifiers. There are currently 3 appendices that are filled out that provide lists of relationships between different types of entities. So Appendix I, the ones we would be working with mostly would be Appendix I and Appendix, just in terms of bibliographic records, would be Appendix I and Appendix J. So here are 2 examples of a relationship that a designator could be used for. You have a 710 for an issuing body, which you would indicate the nature of the relationship as issuing body. Or you might have a publication that is a supplement to another publication, so that could be represented by the relationship designator. Now, just to let you know, if you are looking at any test records that were created by LC testers, the policy statement associated with these practices did not require relationship designators. So you'll see many records that don't have the subfield E or the subfield I as part of it, as part of the added entry. However, many catalogers did apply their judgment to give them if they wanted to practice with them. And I also wanted to point out that technically speaking, BFF could be a relationship designator, but it is not yet designated in RDA. I also wanted to point out that the lists that are in Appendix I, J, and K are not prescribed. They're just examples. So you could, if there was a need for you to designate a different type of relationship than what is listed in those, then you are able to do that. So maybe sometime we will have BFFs between name authority records. Okay, now a concept that's in RDA is the authorized access point for the work. So when constructing an authorized access point that represents a work or expression, use the preferred title as the basis. Then, if applicable, combine the preferred title with the authorized access point for the person, family, or corporate body responsible for the work, essentially the creator, and the preferred title of the work. Okay, so the authorized access point will essentially consist of the creator plus the preferred title, if there is a creator that is identified, a primary creator that's identified. RDA 5.5 then also specifies that if 2 or more works are represented by the same or similar access points, add to that access point a distinguishing term, a distinguishing element, such as form of work, place of origin, or other distinguishing term, and you have instructions as to some suggestions for those kinds of terms at 6.27.1.9. Well, essentially, when a serials cataloger looks at this, they see a uniform title. So the uniform titles that were used to uniquely identify serial works. So out of the ashes of the uniform title, RDA has produced the authorized access points for works and expressions. And here are some examples according to RDA practice. Roger Ebert's movie yearbook. Roger Ebert is the author, so even though this is a serial, he is the author of it, and he's the author of every issue. So we have the combination of creator plus preferred title. The second example is a newsletter, similar situation, but a family newsletter. You have additional examples. The third one, the Western Cape Housing Development, is just a title with no creator. Same way, the fourth example is a conference, proceedings from a conference. The fifth example, the bulletin, is of an example that should be very familiar to serials catalogers. The qualifying term, the corporate body is used as a qualifying term, even though it's not the creator, quote-unquote, creator of the work. It doesn't fall under the criteria. And the last example, these first five examples are authorized access points for works. You can also have an authorized access point for an expression of a work. In this case, you have the English language translation of a Chinese work. So that's the authorized access point for the English translation. Okay. So now that we have gone through, the next common step in our cataloging practice is to provide our other titles. So here are the instructions to transcribe other titles associated with the manifestation. Those really have not changed from former practice, from concert practice. And there is the LC policy statement at 2.3.6.3 that provides best practices for recording variant titles, and it's nearly identical to the previous practice. You would also record the ISSN in a serial record, and there are no changes there. I provided the rule for that. Now, if you're working your way down the serial record in a mark form, mark order, the next thing you would hit would be addition statement. And the changes here are the general changes that we have already talked about. No abbreviations of transcribed elements. And the use, if you end a statement with an abbreviation, then depending on the following statement, you may have the double punctuation, the double period, one for the abbreviation and one for the ISBD punctuation. Okay, let's talk a little bit about publication statement, our 260 field. All of these elements, place, publisher name, and date of publication, are core elements, so they need to be provided. Copyright date is a separate element in RDA, and it does not substitute for a publication date. Okay. So, and I'll go ahead and preface this by saying that Adam, in his webinar, again, I'm referencing Adam Schiff's webinar, he has provided copious examples that are very illustrative of publication statements. We're just going to cover a couple common cases and essentially one guideline that has to do with publication. And I refer you to his work if you have more questions. Under RDA, if more than one place of publication or publisher appears on the source of information used for transcription, then only the first element is required. Now, there's a general practice, and this is actually fairly common with serials. What if publication information is lacking? Well, I wouldn't say it's fairly common, but it happens. If place, publisher, date does not appear on the piece, then the distribution manufacturer elements become the core elements, which means that catalogers will likely want to supply probable information for the publication elements whenever possible to avoid having to supply, having to look for, actually, examine the piece and look for distribution and manufacturer information. So here are two examples depending on whether the cataloger has attempted to supply publication information versus relying on distribution and manufacturer information. In the first case, you can see that if you look at the on source right here, you can see that there is no explicit publication statement on the source. There's a publisher statement. There's no place of publication, and there is a publication date. There's only a distribution statement for your place of publication. Now the cataloger, following RDA, can do this. They can put a statement saying place of publication not identified, and if there is no publication statement or publisher statement or date statement, then you would have that kind of statement supplied by the cataloger. However, on the case, it might make more sense if the cataloger is relatively comfortable with the fact that if it's distributed in Australia, and if they look at the piece and identify the fact it's mostly about Australia, or it looks like all the authors are from Australia, or any number of conditions that they might see, they could probably conjecture that, oh, it might be from Australia. So the cataloger could supply the place of publication here and provide a statement which is a little clearer in a display without really being wrong. The second case is a case where this particular thing might be a serially issued CD-ROM, which nowhere on external or internal sources there's a statement of publication, of publisher or place of publication. But on the jewel box, there's only a statement that says it's published in 2010 and distributed by this distributor. This distributor is located in these cities. So it could very well be that in the second example, there's no explicit statement on an internal or external source. But when the cataloger looks at the files that are on the CD-ROM, they see that everything has to do with the American Statistical Association Boston chapter, and that it looks like that's where this really came from, even though there's no explicit statement of that. In that kind of situation, it would be possible for the cataloger to provide a probable place of publication and publisher. So it could be the case that on examining the resource, the cataloger can identify a probable publisher, or there might be something like acquisition records or some other kind of correspondence that would make it clear who the publisher was without having an explicit statement on the piece. So it is up to the cataloger to make that judgment, but I think one statement is probably clearer for display than the other, and actually probably easier to construct for the serials cataloger. Okay, so what's the same? The publication date is the same as what current practice is. So if the date of publication, however, publication date is a core element. Okay. So if you have the first issue in hand, and this is like former AACR2 practice, if you have first issue in hand, then you transcribe the publication date as it appears or supply it if it does not appear on the piece. If you have last issue in hand, you transcribe or supply. Or if you know what the publication date is of first or last issue but don't have it in hand, you can also supply it. Okay, so that's a little different from what previous AACR2 practice was and what previous concert practice is. So in these examples here, there is in the RDA rule 2.8.6.5, it does say that if the first or last issue is not available, you can supply an approximate date. So here are some examples of supplied dates. The cataloger has the third issue in hand. Obviously, it's going to be start publication the same year as the first issue. The second example, the last part isn't available, but the cataloger knows the ending date. And in the last example, the first and last issues are not available, but information is known about when the publication dates are. Now, in a multi-part practice and in cataloging practice in general, if you do not record the date of publication, if you don't have a date of publication to record, you would have a statement that says data publication not identified. That LC policy statement that I've identified at the bottom of the slide says, basically gives the serial exception. So that for serials we don't provide the cataloging statement, instead we just leave the element blank. Okay, extent. Record the extent of the item using the terms that are supplied in RDA. Commonly use the carrier type terms. So in a serial record, most of your serials, again, I know there are a few of you that don't work with special formats, but generally it's either going to be print, it's going to be online, or it's going to be microform or direct access resources. RDA also does allow an option to use terms that are in common usage, alternative terms, instead of using the carrier type list terms. We'll see as practice develops how much Concert decides to use this. Extent is pretty much the same under RDA as it was under ACR2, so except for the fact that we don't abbreviate terms. So if a serial is completed, you will give an extent statement something like 3 volumes instead of 3 V period. If it's uncompleted, you just say volumes. Dimensions, cite dimensions to the centimeter, round up, similar to what we do if we would record dimensions in a serial record. And here are some examples of extent, illustrative content, and dimension information that's recorded in following ACR2 versus following RDA. Okay, you'll record frequency just as you would with a serial record under current practice. Then RDA does provide a list of frequencies. When you record numbering, that same provision for only providing what appears on the piece and not abbreviating is followed. So that's one change from AACR2. The thing that is the same as AACR2 is in the serial numbering area, you will record, just like with former practice with AACR2 before the Concert Standard record, first issue, last issue in hand you'll provide in a formatted note. Otherwise you'll provide an unformatted note. Series statements are recorded. Now series statements, not series headings, not series access, but series statements are recorded in the same fashion as under AACR2, again, except for no abbreviations or transcribed. So in this particular example, the words, volume, and number are what appear on the piece, and that's what's transcribed. Going down through the serial record, looking at our notes, language and script of the content are identical to practice in AACR2. Recording the issue used as the basis for identification of the resource is the same as AACR2. If the identification is not based on the first part, then provide a note. And again, if you consult more than one issue, then you provide a latest issue consulted. And really the only difference in these examples here, the phrase identification of the resource based on instead of description based on is in RDA, but that is not prescriptive terminology. That's only terminology that's used in examples. So if Concert wanted to have a practice that said we would always use description based on, as we always have in the past, that would be perfectly appropriate. In these examples, the terms that are abbreviated because that's how they appear on the pieces from which they are transcribed. Just so that, and I have a note in the slide to that effect. The last example is an example of an unnumbered serial, which has been cataloged as a serial. So it's a monographic series that's been cataloged as a serial. So you have your description based on the latest issue consulted. You use the entry authorized access point rather than any type of numbering to identify the issue. Recording the source of title. Recording the source of title is the same as or similar to AACR2 in the sense that if you have something that consists of pages, title sheets, or images of those, then you do not record the source of the title proper. Okay. But in all other cases, you would record the source of the title proper. And I provided some examples there. There's also a specific rule in RDA which says if the volume title page is used as a preferred source for a serial, then you will also provide that as a title source note. There's nothing in RDA that talks about combining this information with the identification issue used for identification note, but you can certainly do that following concert practice. And again, that'll be up to concert to identify that. Okay, related works and expressions. The most common works and expressions are listed in Appendix J between works and expressions. So what we're talking about there and the kinds of situations we see with serials are sequential works, which would correspond to our MARC 780, 785 field, our accompanying works, which correspond to supplements, 770, 772. Also, maybe you're issued with your 777 and 787 you can use for other types of accompanying works. And your derivative expressions, so your generally your translations and language additions. And then if you have, you record related manifestations, so if you have a publication, a serial appearing in different formats, you have Appendix J that will describe the different relationships, and MARC 775 or 776. Finally, you would have your access points for series, and those are similar to what we currently, the practice we currently follow. So, I've recorded the RDA instructions there and how the series numbering is recorded. And here's a sample RDA record for you to look at after we've been through all that. This is an example of an electronic serial that is issued by a family. This is taken from the LC work set. You can see some of the things that you expect, the 336, 337, 338. You have a family that's listed in RDA, heading for a family that's listed in a 100. This cataloger has used the also identification of the resource based on this, following the example in RDA. They've also used the latest issue consulted. Okay. So that's our quick tour through RDA. I know we're running a little late, and I just have a couple points that I want to sort of next steps kind of thing, and then we'll open it up for questions. And I do apologize for going over. I hope everyone's able to hang in there for another 10 minutes or so. The CRC, the test from the Continuing Resources Cataloging Committee. The records and the surveys are available from ALA Direct at this URL. To be honest, I would have loved to have taken the time to go through those records, take a look at them, see where people had problems, that kind of thing, and I just didn't have time. The general information we got back from the surveys was that of the people who were working, the catalogers who were working doing this test, about half of them seemed to be generally okay with working with it. About half of them seemed to be sort of resigned to the fact that they would have to be working with RDA in the future, but weren't jumping on the bandwagon. What I saw in the survey results, I saw two sort of general responses in the survey results, and it was that those who used some of the tools, like maybe they used Renette's serial workflow that's available in RDA, or they used some other type of workflow to sort of guide them through RDA, that those catalogers, first of all, they tended to be experienced catalogers because they knew about the tools. And they knew the more information about the test, the national test. And second, they were the ones, they were more comfortable with just following along step by step, consulting RDA as they needed to create a record. And those were the ones that generally were pretty satisfied. Whereas there was another group of catalogers who either weren't as experienced, didn't know about the tools, decided that they were going to look at RDA fresh and start from scratch, and they floundered a lot and expressed a lot of frustration. So if you're going to be working with serial catalog records or creating some records, I would suggest starting with some of the tools that Renette has created, and there are some other resources available. So still to be resolved, RDA allows for communities of practice to develop other practices that are supplemental to RDA. And I'm going to suggest that the CONSER folks are going to be the primary lead on that in the serials cataloging area, and to a lesser degree the ISSN Center. I want to focus on one specific thing, which is the aggregator neutral record, because the aggregator neutral record is a specific practice that has been that in general the cataloging community has found very useful, and which to a large degree violates some of the basic tenets of RDA and FRBR. So the aggregator neutral record, and all this information is taken from the frequently asked questions on the CONSER page for the aggregator neutral approach. All versions of the same online record appear on one record. Okay, so it's a separate record from the print. There's one single online version record. The reason that we came up with this approach is that essentially there is one basic electronic serial that is being distributed across multiple aggregators, and it became too difficult for catalogers to try to track what were essentially licensing arrangements for different versions which were available from different sources. So the way that these records differ from other serial records is that multiple manifestations of electronic serials are covered by a single record, with only the presence of the URL and possibly a variant title in a 246 indicating the different manifestations. The sum of the publication information is the same as the original serial. So this is especially true when CONSER and other catalogers really started saying, you know, you can create, and OCLC in particular, you can create an eSerial record. You don't even have to look at the eSerial, or because so many electronic serials do not reproduce the same sources as the original, you oftentimes do not have good sources to work with. So in that case, CONSER said, well, why don't you go ahead and you have an option if the sources are not available to you in creating a record, to create a record based on the print version. So here's an example of a description based on print version record. And you can see that the manifestation information is down in the 856s. You've got 5 different versions that were available, and one of the reasons that we followed this practice was also to indicate, like, we have the first one, link no longer valid. So that's the kind of thing, do you want to actually have a separate record in OCLC, which you then have to somehow delete or make no longer available? So this sort of indicates the reason that we did it. Obviously the publication information is from the print. Okay. So in that sense you are describing manifestation information associated with a print. But in some respects this is sort of heading towards actually having an expression level record, because this information is, as long as the online version is also published by the same publisher as the print version, in some respects it's heading a little more towards an expression level record in just some ways. So I just wanted to float that idea out there. We have the final page here is additional resources for those of you that are a little more dedicated to serials. If you're going to be working with serials, you'll find some useful stuff here. I especially want to commend Renette Davis at the University of Chicago, who formerly at the University of Chicago. They put together some great test documentation, and her presentation's a really good overview as well. So I do apologize for going over, and if there's any questions at this point, I will be happy to address them. So go ahead and I think I got my chat box open here. Oh, and let me hand it back over. Well, let me see, I think. Okay. Oh, okay. 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 Oh, I see. Unfortunately, I had the chat box open and not the questions box. So here we go. Let me start looking at these. Having real problems with intermittent audio. Okay, slide 15. It is allowable to have an ellipse at the beginning. Should the ellipse be in brackets because it does not appear on the item? No, the ellipse in general, even though it is supplied by the cataloger, it's not being looked at as a cataloger supplied element in the same way. And in terms of affecting filing, you would do your filing indicator in the 245. So you would go ahead and account for the ellipses in the filing indicator. There's a question about statement of responsibility, which I think I've sort of answered. If we have different authors in a statement of responsibility from issue to issue, you would actually create a new record. And as I've mentioned, Concert's probably going to be working with LC in terms of developing some policy statements that we won't need to create new records. How do you handle a situation where the serial has a subtitle with the cover title if the cover title is in the subfield B? Well, you would transcribe your subtitle from whatever your preferred source is. So if your preferred source that you're transcribing from the title, you're transcribing the title proper from, also has a subtitle, then you would transcribe that in 245 subfield B. I'm not sure if that's what the question is, but yeah, I see another question about an annual publication with different authors, and again, we would create new descriptions, currently under RDA, but we'll be working on that. And I see some more. The reason that I really sort of emphasize that is because it is a real change. The whole fact that a change of author would create a new description. There's another question about filing indicator with the introductory mark of omission, and again, you would use your filing indicator to skip those for your purposes of filing. So do we use only addition ed period if that is how it is written in the serial? Yes. Someone has a question about the use of ed period rather than addition. And yes, you will, if you are transcribing the word addition, you will transcribe it no matter where it appears in the record. You will transcribe the word addition fully as the word addition. How do we get a copy of Adam's presentation? I will actually refer that question to Julie Reese and the ALCTS organizers. And I see I'm almost finished with the questions. I just have a few more here. Do bracketed beginning ending publication dates go into the fixed fields? Actually, there has been no determination. There has been a change to what appears in the fixed fields at this point. So my understanding is that the fixed fields would still correspond to the serial numbering area and not necessarily the publication dates. If there is a change to that, then we can let you know. What is the plan for recataloging RDA records? I don't think there is a plan at this point. We're still too early on. What is the intention of the profession relative to past records? That history of past records. We are dealing with that still with pre-AACR2 records. Okay, so it's something that Concert has not come out with a specific response to yet. We'll be discussing it over the next several meetings of Concert. Let's see, slide 18 on parallel titles. In an earlier slide, I used ISBD punctuation for other examples. I do apologize if I was inconsistent about the use of ISBD punctuation. I was trying to replicate what would be in 245. So any errors are mine, and I will be happy to hear about them to correct them before the slides are distributed. Okay. Oh, and Anna Kristan corrected me on slide 52. I made a statement to the effect that the example record was from the LC workset. It's not from the LC workset. It's from the RDA test common set. It's not actually the LC workset. That's what I meant was the test common set. Okay. Okay. I think that I'll be handing this back off to. That's pretty much all we have time for now. So if you do have further questions, as Janet said earlier, this will be distributed, and I will be happy to answer further questions and provide any other information that I can. So I'll go ahead and hand this back to Janet for a wrap-up.
Okay, thanks, Steve, for that insightful program that has provided us with an understanding on RDA and serials cataloging. We hope you found today's webinar useful. You will soon receive a short online evaluation form. Please take a few minutes to respond to the questions and return the form to us. The comments that are received are reviewed by the ALCTS CE committee and used to plan additional continuing education offerings. And just a reminder, once again, this webinar has been recorded, and you will receive an email shortly after the conclusion with a link to the recording. You will also receive a copy of Steve's PowerPoint slides. Now, for your convenience, I've noted the upcoming webinars related to RDA. On March 16th, we have linked library data, tuning library metadata for the semantic web. On April the 6th, we have preparing copy catalogers for RDA. On October the 19th, we have RDA basics, and it'll be covering scores, which will be the first session. A second session will be followed on October 26th, where RDA basics will cover the sound recordings. Information about all ALCTS webinars are featured on the ALCTS homepage, and the web address is given here on this slide. New webinars and CE events are continuously being developed, so check the ALCTS homepage frequently for new information. We welcome suggestions for webinars and other continuing educational opportunities. You may contact me at janet.arberg@okstate.edu or submit a proposal online using the ALCTS webinar proposal form found at the ALCTS Continuing Education homepage. In closing today, I would especially like to thank Yan Lee for providing technical support for today's webinar. She and her colleagues on the CE Committee's Technical Support Subcommittee make it possible to present these webinars so smoothly. We sincerely appreciate your attendance today and hope you will join us again for other presentations ALCTS has to offer. Thank you.